Midakiase, Chante Washte Nape Chiuzapi. Good afternoon, my relatives. I greet you today with a warm handshake. My Lakota name is Shunhizi Oda Agliwi, which means she brings many buckskin horses. And my English name is Fawn Catherine Wasin Zi. I am a member of the Standing Rock Nation. I currently live in the Long Soldier District, or 48th North Dakota. I am from the Kangiska, or the White Crow Tioshpaye of the Hunkpapa Lakota. Coming here to you from Rock Industries. So I'm very happy to be here today. I am former biologist for the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, current 5th and 6th grade math teacher, very excited to be ending a school year here. Practice makes perfect. And I am the current chairwoman of the Sage Development Authority. And for those of you who don't know, Sage Development Authority is a Section 17 corporation for the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. And it is our goal to think beyond no DAPL and bring renewable energies onto Standing Rock Nation, not only for economic development, but just because we are humans on this earth, and as a human nation, humankind, we need to start thinking outside of the box. So our first project is called Ombetu Wi, and it is a 235 megawatt potential wind farm that's going to be located on the Porcupine Hills, which is just west of 48th North Dakota, and it's going to be located in the Porcupine District of the Standing Rock Nation. If any of you ever need any information regarding the project, you can look at ampetuwi.com. Today, I am hosting a discussion called Women of the Movement Beyond No DAPL. And I have a couple great ladies here with me today. I'd like to introduce you to Tokata Iron Eyes and Tara Houska. Let's start with you, Tokata. You mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hamidak Yapi, Chandewa Shtena Bechi Zapi, Tokata Wi Iron Eyes and Machi Yapi. I'm so happy to be here with y'all today. And yeah, always good to be in a space with other Indigenous women, radical change makers, right? Like inherently. So very excited for today's conversation and always to learn more. Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. How about you, Tara? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, Brishu and Dinawi Morgan and Duck, Minawa Giniw, Jaboy Quay and Dishnakas, Makwan Dizim, Couchiching and Dunchba. My name is Tara. I'm very clan from Couchiching First Nation and Anishinaabe. Super glad to be in space with y'all. And I actually just went through Standing Rock yesterday on my way back from ceremonies over in Montana. Pretty wild. It's like 80 here and it's snowing over in Montana right now. They got like over a foot of snow, right? Like pretty nuts. So really glad to be in conversation about this critical issue facing humankind and all of creation. So Chimikwach.
Awesome, welcome. And do we have Ruth here? Hi Ruth, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Madzigidads, thank you for having me. Nido Shadzi, Nakbaga Madashi, Mia Adasheds, Mabe Sigids, Madzigidads, Nakbaga. Thank you for having me. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you, Ruth. So when I got asked to moderate this session, I was really thinking about it last night and just meditating about it. And, it's titled No DAPL or Beyond No DAPL, Women of the Movement. And one thing that popped into my head was an interview that my grandmother did. My grandmother and my dad are both survivors of the Pick-Sloan Act. And in 2017, during the No DAPL movement, my grandmother gave an interview where she said, we are, I just want to win once. I'm tired of this. She as a kid, she had to watch her home being burned down. She was promised, free energy for the rest of her life. Traditional medicines, all of that was all taken from her. And she said, in my lifetime, I want to win once. And I was thinking about that last night, and what popped in my head was, I want that too. But you know what? That's reality right now. I think we are winning. It is our reality right now because we have you three amazing women who are out there doing the job. So could you just kind of like maybe start with you, Tokata, and what are you working on right now?
Yeah, so I've just finished my freshman year of college at Bard College at Timmins Rock, online, and during the pandemic, which was super hard, but I'm very thankful for the experience and to only be 17 and have the opportunity to fulfill that commitment. Makes me feel very happy. And I've also started working more on music, like my own personal artistry. I've realized that like a lot of times, there aren't a lot of opportunities for Indigenous peoples to utilize their own platforms and their own voice in a way that isn't exploitive. And so I've been trying to very much like narrow down where I'm putting my time and energy and making sure that it's going to beautiful places like this, conversations with people like me, right? Hosted by people like me. Yeah, and so that's what I'm working on. And the main goal of all of it, is just always land back. That's yeah. That's the plan.
Ruth, and I think back on what you're doing beyond No Dapple. You got elected to North Dakota House of Representatives. Can you talk a little bit about what you've been doing in the House?
Sure. It's been an interesting year in this legislative session. They tell us that the state legislatures that are, though it's just very interesting, like the political landscape, of course, North Dakota, but when we have a Democrat president, they say there's kind of a trend or a pattern in local state legislatures as well, that Democrats have an extremely tough time at the state level, which I believe to be true. So I just finished my second legislative session in North Dakota. We serve 4-year terms, and so I'll be running for re-election in 2022. And so some of the things we worked on focused on supporting working families, adequate funding for schools, looking at infrastructure needs. Some of the bills that I introduced focused on rent late fee caps, getting dark money out of politics, a Truth Healing Reconciliation Commission, and authored the Senate Bill 2304, which requires Native American history to be taught in grades K through 12, which was completely a true grassroots community-driven effort. And so just want to give a huge thank you to everybody who came together and rallied behind that piece of legislation. Also a study that just was selected yesterday by legislative management that focuses on the behavioral health needs of incarcerated individuals. So that's some of the work, but
very important. And you also pass a bill to allow graduates to wear their regalia and everything in their graduation ceremonies? Okay.
Yes, yep, that bill passed in my first session. So in 2019, it had an emergency clause attached to it. So that meant as soon as the governor signed it, it went into effect, rather than waiting until August 1st when all the other bills go into effect. So yes, we're still seeing how that bill or that new law is playing out. It's been a law here in North Dakota since 2019. And of course, we looked at different states who had already implemented that law and kind of exchanged notes with them and from them. I'm so thankful for the support to like the collaboration of other Native state legislators across the country.
Yes, absolutely. And I could not be more thrilled with the required teaching of the Native American history class, because you know what, there is, I I hate to say it like this, but there's some ignorance out there about our native cultures. And I would like if we could just be more open, then it'd be less stigmatizing, because there's a lot of, I would say, almost like border towns that are very ignorant about our actual culture. And it's shocking, because I'm like, you live 20 miles away. You know, I think it's very important to help other societies, other cultures to teach about our own. Well, Tara, let's move on with you. What are you up to?
So after the ground resistance against Dakota Access Pipeline, I went back to DC for a bit and kind of finished up my time there, and thought I was going to spend a little more time out working on Capitol Hill and working on those pieces. But then they started building Line 3 around my home state. I'm from Minnesota, and that's our territory that this tar sands pipeline is threatening. It was something that we knew when I was out in Dakota Access. Part of my reason for being out there was not only to stand in solidarity, but also because because Enbridge, the company behind Line 3, is like a 28% owner of Dakota Access Pipeline. So they had a different project and they canned it and did Line 3 instead. But before they canned it, they went towards Dakota Access and they're like, okay, well, we're gonna screw up this territory too, you know, and like, I felt really drawn to that. And then I came home and ended up having to move back sooner than what I thought. And they unanimously approved Line 3 in 2018. I formed a collective and began living about 200 yards off the proposed line 3 years ago. So have been living and working and doing land defense work ever since. I'm actually calling you from camp right now. So if I cut out, that's why. Have been training hundreds of people in direct action and resistance and campaigning, and using those levers to push and pull and try to reach the right decision makers to defend our beautiful places and uphold tribal sovereignty. Doing a bunch of divestment work too, and food sovereignty, and trying to help people reestablish their connective tissue to our mother. So harvesting wild rice, hunting, fishing, and maple syruping. We just did that just like over the spring. It was really, really beautiful to do that. I got to get Jane Fonda to drink from a tree. That was pretty cool. But yeah, it's been a return to the land ever since, going out to Dakota Access and seeing the power of people coming together.
Amazing work, Tara. We're lucky to have you today. I might, come to camp, and so you guys can teach me how to harvest wild rice. Like, I've always wanted to do that.
You are
for my master's degree, I studied wetlands. So yeah. So, our topic today is beyond no DAPL, but ladies, how has the no DAPL movement changed the way you think about renewable energy in the country that we live in? Tokata?
Yeah, I mean, it changed everything. I think all of us, can recognize the ripple effect that movement had across the world, especially, I think, in the encouragement specifically of young people to voice their concerns about their futures. And right, this sort of turn of events where people actually cared what children thought. And that definitely has continued, and it's continued in me, I think, in a way, for myself, I've always just known since then that like my voice inherently has value, and I knew it before, but now I feel justified, right, in making sure that my boundaries and my needs are met in spaces that I'm in, because that should be required. And those needs are met for other people, right, with privilege. And so it takes a lot of work to be able to demand that. And yeah, for me, everything that I am right now, all of the opportunities that I've had, the different roles that I've gotten to play within movements, within my own community, those things happened and were incepted at Standing Rock, from the people that I met, right? The relationships that I made there. The change in perspective, like growing up in North and South Dakota, like my whole life, and not having any exposure to white people who like weren't violent. So it was really epic, you know, to broaden my sense of community to a global community, and also to learn, right, that inherently, like, we're still related to our enemies. And the work that we do is not for one people, right? It is for all of us, and it is for the earth. Yeah, so it definitely changed everything for me individually and across the entire globe. Yeah.
Absolutely. Ruth, how has the No DAPO movement changed the way you think about renewable energy in the country?
It it really opened my eyes to the militarization of law enforcement within our homelands, and seeing the use of excessive force. That really opened my eyes. And during that time, 3 of us natives were running in a statewide race. We had Chase Iron Eyes running for U.S. House Congress, and then Marlo Hunt Bobrun running for Public Service Commission. And so I was running for Insurance Commissioner, and it was all 3 of our first time running ever in a race, in an election, and it just happened to be statewide. But just that's really what changed my view, my worldview, was seeing things happen within our own backyard, so to speak, you know, right here in our homelands and on American soil. You know, after the election, I did a small independent contract with ACLU of North Dakota to make sure that the work or the presence was kept at the camps, you know, in more of a listening role, while the one worker at the time for ACLU of North Dakota was busy at the legislature. And just seeing the blood in the snow really changed me. It changed me. And hearing you know, different people from the East Coast, the West Coast, with the UN delegation, the human rights director of ACLU, you know, grown men just being completely blown away by what they were seeing and saying, this is a war zone, this is a war zone, you know. And so that's really what changed my worldview on things, seeing blood in the snow from different actions that had taken place. So I would say, in short, that's really what changed my worldview, and how this could still happen, how the amount of violence towards peaceful protesters or peaceful demonstrations could turn so violent. And I felt very unsafe, you know, driving back and forth from the camps to Fargo, being followed and things like that really heightened my awareness to how important it is for security.
Yeah, at the time, I never really went to Bismarck, and I just live right here in 48. So I never experienced that fear of having to drive through on that highway. And I find it kind of fascinating that you said war zone. You know, a lot of people don't realize it, but our tribal enrollment numbers are actually prisoner of war numbers. We are technically in a war zone. You know, we're in a POW camp on the reservations. And a lot of people don't realize that. So Tara, how has the No DAPO movement changed the way you think about renewable energy in the country?
Couple things, I guess. With the renewables piece, it's whenever I see tribally led solar projects or wind projects, or, you know, anything that involves like sustainability and practices that are not entirely steeped in like endless consumption and extraction, to me that's just like a case in point of how this is actually possible, right? Like the fossil fuel companies and the politicians they pay and the systems that they corrupt would have you believe that it's just impossible, right? Like, what are you going to shut off the oil taps tomorrow? You know, like that's always like the response to their ongoing, like basically clutches onto how energy is produced and consumed. And the dependency that they're trying to spread through the rest of the world on fossil fuels, right? Like it's like when you start with like a pipeline project, whether it's Dakota Access Pipeline or Line 3 or Trans Mountain or Keystone XL, it's like the threshold issue is like, oh, no, it's not that like, you know, we're trying to expand the industry. It's that like, we need this, right? Like we need to replace this pipeline. We need a new pipeline. Like, it's just like the need is just presumed, right? Like, it's like it's an assumption. Like in this case, like with our own pipeline fight here, it's like, oh, well, the old one's leaking. We need to put in a new one. And it's like, no, like that's not what we're saying. We're saying the old one is leaking. Don't screw up another place, decommission the old line, clean up your mess, and move on to renewables, right? Like you guys are intentionally trying to stop progress from happening, like very intentionally. And like those pieces that Ruth is talking about, when it comes to the militarization components of this, it's incredible. You know, the amount of violence and harassment, surveillance, like this ongoing theme of war, right? And what that actually means when you've got a corporation who controls basically all the strings. You know, here in Minnesota, they learned a lot from Standing Rock. Like your sheriffs actually came over here to train them into how to build a task force made of private security, you know, state law enforcement, federal, and the feds, and how to surveil, how to threaten, how to establish a public safety escrow trust where they're literally paying police officers for any protests associated with Line 3. So that means like police officers that are parked right down the road from me right now, watching this camp, this private property. I mean, that's what they learn. And it's like all of that to stop progress and all of that to harass Native people who are literally just trying to protect our land. I mean, the amount of pushback is absolutely incredible, but then also the amount of fear that they have of people holding a braid of sweetgrass, the amount of fear they have of young people running out to Washington, D.C. and inspiring the world, the amount of fear they have of LaDonna Allard in her home, you know, and the fact that they surveilled her all the way to the end of her life. You know, this woman who brought people together in love. Like that's the message, right? Like that was being pushed out was we need to love our mother and love each other. I mean, yeah, the forces that be are powerful, but they recognize that we're more so. So renewables is just one piece of that, right? And the amount of pushback is enormous.
Yeah, it just flabbergasts me why, you know, there is room for all of it. And they teach elementary kids this. Our fossil fuels, our fossil resources are finite. They are a limiting factor. And not only, you know, are the substrates, all the extra coming off of them, they may cause cancer, they're poisoning our water, all of this, but we can't rely on them because they're finite. We have to find something that is renewable and something that's not going to harm Grandmother Earth. So we got to put our minds together and figure out a way, everyone on this world. And that's what I loved about No Dapple, was it was worldwide. And it woke a lot of people up. So ladies, what do you think about the concept of activism? And do you consider yourself an activist? Tokata? How about you?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, I don't know. I always laugh at myself when I call myself an activist. So I would say like, no, like I don't like gravitate towards it, but it is inherent, like as a part of who I am, right? Like to be a resisting ward of the state, like that's just what it is. Yeah, and activism though as a whole, like is kind of bogus to me, especially like within, right, like capitalist systems, like people who want to try to somehow change, right, something that allowed for genocide already. Like I don't understand kind of that part yet, and I'm trying to figure out, you know, how we can do both. But activism, right, the entire point of it is that we won't have to do it anymore at one point, right? That it should have been at the basis, like no one should ever have to fight for necessities. No one should have to fight for human rights. Like no one should have to oppose their own government, like people who are supposed to be taking care of us, who are put into positions of power, so that they can do that, right? And they're completely abusing it. Yeah, and it shouldn't have to be my job or anybody else's job to tell them what to do. They should have, it needs to be a system, right, where people can hold themselves accountable. And that has not happened in like any of our history. And now, right, just now is that starting to happen. But it's not people holding themselves accountable, right? It's still only us calling out what is wrong, and then people waiting for us to educate them, right, about what's wrong. Like it's not an inherent thing yet. And I think that that's really what needs to happen, right? Like activism is a side effect still of the problem.
Yes, absolutely. How about you, Ruth?
I would completely agree with Tokata. I think she covered it pretty well. You know, it's hopefully we get to a point in time where we're not constantly having to fight, you know, for our rights. You know, we joke and say like, yeah, I would love to just be drinking lemonade or iced tea, sitting outside at my mom's garden, you know, in Mandarin, and not having to, you know, stand up for others. You know, I mean, it's life's work, but at the same time, it's a great deal of stress. And so it's important, I will say that it's really important that we take care of ourselves and each other, because it's a great deal of, you put your mind, body, and soul through so much. And so I'm thankful that our systems that we have, you know, in place, that our ancestors put in place for us years ago, are still here, you know, to help us live in a good way and take care of ourselves. So I think a component of that question would be, you know, really taking care of ourselves so that we are able to continue down this path. But I agree, you know, finding upstream solutions so that one day we're not having to constantly put our lives, you know, at risk or in harm's way in standing up for the rights of everyone, including the earth. So.
How about you, Tara? What do you think about the concept of activism, and do you consider yourself an activist?
Wholeheartedly no. I mean, the first time I was called an activist was by the Washington Post. I had moved to DC, had encountered Native mascots really for the first time in my life. I'd not really been around that growing up. I was up in the woods and never seen that. I grew up in a border town, like those border towns you're talking about, that are super ignorant and don't have the educational tools that we need to be like, why is this person here? Why are these Native people still living here? What happened to them? What's the situation? But yeah, so the Washington Post did this survey, and they like reached out to Natives on Twitter that were in the DC area and asked me if I thought it was offensive. And I was like, yeah, obviously. And then in the paper, it said Native American activist Tara Houska said, and I was like, are you serious? I haven't even been to a protest of any kind, but like, I guess I'm an activist now because I had an opinion that you didn't like, you know, like to me, like activist is a term that's used to kind of like, undermine something someone is saying, right? Like it puts you into a different category of kind of like a manic or like outside approach or something like that, when in fact I think that activism is just about being active. Like someone's rights are being violated, the earth is not being represented, like the voiceless are not being heard. So some of us feel called into action. I hope more of us do. Like I think that we should all be active on these issues, you know. And it is hard, right? Like that piece that Ruth is talking about, like, yeah, it would be way, like when I just came back from ceremonies, right? And like being in the woods and being in the lodge and being with the people is like so beautiful, right? And that helps me to keep going and doing this work. But yeah, of course, like withdrawing and like pulling yourself out of all of this, of all this like toxic manifestations of colonialism would be really, you know, nice. But we're also trying to be part of community and follow our sacred instructions to, you know, be the best people that we possibly can. I mean, that said, I think there are activists, right? Like there's also like reflections of oligarchy and capitalism and hierarchy in activist circles also. And you see folks show up and put their fists up and take some pictures and roll out, you know? And that's like, I'm like, come on, man, like at least hang out for a little bit, be in the meetings.
It's a photo
Come
op.
spend some time on the conference calls that are gonna go all day long, because like no one sees that part, right? Like they just see like the pieces where you're in like largely white media, right, or something like that, and it's like, no, that's like a little piece like of many other things. But I'll leave it at that.
I just want to read like a couple comments that came through. Someone wrote, I heard Tatanka Wajila, who is our general manager here at Sage Development Authority, Joe McNeil, they wrote, as a person of color in this country, your life is a form of activism. What do you guys think of that? Tokata?
Yeah, I mean, just to go back to what Ruth was saying about taking care of yourself, like, I think that like that stuff is the most essential. That's why like I try not to introduce myself as anything other than like a regular person, because it's like everything that I am, somebody else has the opportunity to be. I'm no different from anybody else. But what makes me, right, different now is that I'm aware that I have an inherent responsibility to the earth as an earthling, like as a person who needs, right, like life-saving stuff from the earth, right? I have to protect it, and I have to protect it not only for me, but for my community and for the generations of people behind me who laid down their lives so that I could be here and so that I could do that. And it should have been, it's inherent for everybody. It's inherent for every human being who needs water and who needs sunlight and air to breathe, right? Like these are non-negotiable things. These are the covenants of life on earth, and we cannot act like we get to bend the rules when it comes to that, right? Mm-hmm. And so taking care of yourself, giving yourself the space to acknowledge that as Indigenous women specifically, making sure that you are well with mind, body, and spirit takes priority and is one of the most radical things that you could do. They don't want us to exist, period. So when we do more than survive, that is everything our ancestors dreamed of and more.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, I've talked about this before a couple other occasions, but you know, I always feel like when we make decisions in our board meetings, we always ask that we think 7 generations ahead. How are these decisions we're making today going to affect 7 generations ahead? And then I start thinking, you know what? We also need to look 7 generations in the past. What did our ancestors do? Our ancestors made the best decisions they could for us today. And we are a product of that. And we're an amazing product of that because we are the survivors of genocide. And you know what? I think of my mother in times like this. You know, my mother is 72 years old, born in 1949, lifelong resident of Fort Yates. You know, Fort Yates was a fort. And she remembers where the gallows were hanging in Fort Yates. And can you believe that? We live in a society of oppression and we are stuck in that. And we need to find and make solutions in life where we can help our people overcome that oppression. And I'm like, it's just coming from all directions. And I'm like, I can't believe my mother, she pointed them out to me, that's where the gallows were hanging. And I'm just like, in today's modern age, I cannot believe that. I mean, together, we need to find a way. So, I guess my question is for maybe Ruth, you can start this out. How do you look into the past to help you make your decisions today?
How I look in the past to help make the decisions today is really just by, I would say, the courage that I have, or that I feel, comes from my ancestors, from my grandparents that I never got to meet. And I really believe their life was cut short from the flooding of 94% of our agricultural lands, as a result, as you mentioned earlier, the Pix Loan Act. So I'm named after my grandma Ruth, and I also carry her Hidatsa name. And so I think of what they endured and overcame. And so even just with the last name Buffalo, so that presented challenges after the flood, when my grandpa was trying to find work off of the reservation, and ran into some challenges there. And so I think of my grandparents, their struggle, and that's really what helps me take courage and moving forward. And of course, thinking of, like you mentioned, 7 generations ahead, but also acknowledging our ancestors and the struggle, and understanding too how history can even be rewritten within our time by others who might not be sharing a factual narrative of historic events that have taken place even within this year. It makes me reflect a lot and try to understand the past as to why certain leaders were not really uplifted, and their voices were not amplified back then, and they were good people. So I think of my ancestors and my lineage, and they were very, very humble people. And so I think that the opportunity that we have today in correcting the wrongs of the past is also speaking the truth of our ancestors, and speaking the truth of my grandparents and my greats, that they were good people. And although people may only want to uplift certain voices within a certain tribal nation, the thing is that we forget that they have grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren that will fight for them, even though they didn't get to meet them, and still be able to share their story today.
Awesome. So I want to share like a comment that came through on the Facebook page. It's from Martha Phone. It says, I am so inspired by the wealth and diversity of understanding and leadership of you women. As an elder, seeing the strength and truth move forward by you, my heart sings. That's just so beautifully written. Thank you, Martha. We have a question from the audience, and I don't know how to say the name. People mess up my name all the time because it's written in Lakota. So I really don't want to mess it up. So I'm sorry, but I'm just going to say you're from the Netherlands. And the question is, to me, it seems that one of the major outcomes of the No DAPO movement is the global push for defunding fossil energy. What is your view on this? Tara, would you like to, share your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's informed by what Tokata and Ruth have both been saying, and you, Fawn, in terms of like it being a global movement, right? And like I think Dakota Access Pipeline was a moment, like a flashpoint in the overall struggle for our mother, in which the world realized that these oppressed, invisible, forgotten, you name it, people who are either drunk and poor or casino wealthy, and I don't know, like all these different misconceptions of Native people, but still here, right? That they can carry a movement that's heard around the world, you know, that with or without like these big mainstream like nonprofits and all those things that have been controlling the climate conversation for decades at this point, that instead these people that are out in North Dakota in this little community are making noise that's being heard globally. And that includes in the divestment movement, which is an ongoing thing. It's been going on for decades, but when you add in the pieces of impacted community and centering grassroots voices of the people, so they're the ones that are out there like actually speaking for themselves, that's a very different thing than having like a really wonky policy conversation on what divestment is and how we have to like have like climate policy, right? And because of that, you know, we were in all these different banking institutions, meeting with funders, bringing the stories of the human rights violations that happened at Dakota Access Pipeline and in other struggles, Indigenous-led struggles around the globe. And they were listening, and they're still listening right now. I mean, we just did a Defund Line 3 campaign that's ongoing, and it's been, I mean, we had an action, what was it, 2 weeks ago now? 85 cities and 9 countries that were involved in divestment, right? Like that's like super dorky type campaigning, but it's really effective, right? Like we're saying, hey, this is the sacred that these folks are protecting, and you guys are funding it, and you can't hide behind your glass walls and your like concrete and all that stuff anymore. Like we're showing up, you know, in your branches, in your institutions, in your shareholder meetings and all that stuff. I also wanted to speak a little bit to that piece on the past, which is so critical to being an effective, thoughtful, impactful person in whatever it is that you're seeking to do, to remember that we're standing on someone else's shoulders and that all of these people have gotten us here to where we are at this moment, to be alive in this plane, in this space, right? Like the number of our ancestors like fills an entire lodge, it feels like an entire building or whatever it happens to be, right? Just for us to be here in this moment. And when you start thinking like that, that oppressive pieces that you're talking about, Fawn, when you were saying like the gallows were there, right? And like we learn that oppression, and then that oppression is also enacted on each other, right? Like we do that to each other. Like that's something I know that every single one of us, as people who've spoken out, have experienced. Like I feel like if we do a better job to connect ourselves and to heal ourselves and to understand how beautiful it is that we're here, yeah, maybe we stop looking at each other so much and like trying to like feel like someone's taking something from you, rather than being like, look at us as like these survivors and as these resistors. You know, our existence is resistance. And like, isn't it beautiful to see Tokata out there changing the world? Isn't it beautiful to see Ruth, you know, making changes in this system that's so oppressive? Isn't it beautiful to see Fawn and all the group over there like making this incredible wind project? Like it's really powerful way to think and to move in the world.
Thank you, Tara. Very good words. Yeah, I think, you know, talking about oppression and stuff, you know, I start thinking of my students. I'm a 5th and 6th grade math teacher currently. And, you know, it's very difficult to get them to see past this life here. You know, we have a beautiful life here, but that oppression is also here. But so to be able to expose them and to let them know that, hey, yes, you are a survivor of genocide. You know, we have in our genes that it is proven now by science that we carry that in our DNA, the trauma that our ancestors lived through. But we also have that resiliency to get through the grit. To, you know, we are the Buffalo Nation, us Lakota. You know, we face the storm, we will get through it. So sometimes it's very difficult to speak to the young kids, to let them see a little glimpse of hope, you know. But I'm so glad we have you women out there that are on the ground doing this work. It's very inspiring. So thank you. I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about climate justice and climate change. I guess, you know, as a biologist, I like to argue with people because sometimes I look at it on the scientific side, and I'm like, well, you know, on geological time, climate change is normal. You know, you have like, ups and downs of temperature and mini ice ages and global warming. So this is all going to work out. So I guess I'd like to know your guys' thoughts, like, what does climate change mean to you, and what does climate justice mean to you? Takata, you want to start us out?
I mean, just like very simply put, right? Like the Industrial Revolution was not natural. It was like everything but natural. And the way that, right, like it's destroyed the planet in a span of like 2 centuries is devastating. Like there's no other word for the type of destruction, right, that humanity has done to the planet at this point. Like that's not a negotiable thing. And it is really crazy, right? Like a lot of us come from places where those are claims that are still fully disputed, right? As if we're not already facing catastrophic consequences of the warming of the planet, of the change in our climate, right? It's a crisis, and it's daily and ongoing, and has been. And our communities, right, are faced the very first consequences of that change in our land being stolen from us. I mean, that's like the basis of what, will happen to the world if we don't get our act together, if we don't start listening to Indigenous women, like, period. Like, yeah, it will be bad, and everyone will be Indigenous people. And that's what everybody is really scared of, right? Is that like we will have like nothing, we'll have everything taken from us. But it's also the goal. Everyone needs to follow the lead now, because we had the answers. But we're not Native Americans either. We're Indigenous people. I think that that's a good line to draw, right? Like what the Native American represents, what a federal Indian represents, is something completely different. And that is what white people are scared of facing. That's what colonizers are scared of facing, right? Is the idea that violence on their part has been committed, and then B, that we are not that different, right?
Good words. So basically, Indigenous, this is not just an Indigenous problem or an Indigenous issue, it's a humankind issue, right? So good words, Takata, thank you. Ruth, what about your opinion? What do you think about climate justice?
I think climate justice is connected with economic justice, racial justice. So I'm a public health professional. I was going to say nerd, but no, public health.
We're all nerds in something.
Yeah. And so like with environmental health, that just, from doing a lot of research and seeing how communities of color, low income communities are directly impacted by environmental hazards and by design. And so it's so much more. I believe with climate justice, everything's connected, and so it's up to us to help make things better for future generations.
So basically, climate justice is all interrelated with everything else, with Indigenous justice, economic, everything. It's all interconnected, and they all affect each other.
Right, and to that end too, like there's gonna, the people who are being displaced across the globe as a result of the natural disasters, so there's a lot that we need to do to prevent further tragedies from happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Tara, your thoughts?
When I'm in rooms of folks who work on different issues, whether it's racial justice, gender justice, social justice, like economic justice, and to me, the environment is not an issue area. We don't get to make progress in any of those areas if we don't have a habitable place to live. Like, that's the reality, right? Like, unless we have soil to grow food, the clean air to breathe, and water to drink, we will die as a species. And like, whenever I say that, like, it's usually like real quiet and everyone's like, and then like it just moves on, right? And I'm like, no, hold on a second. Like, I'm trying to explain to like everyone that like this relationship that we don't have a choice about that. We are made of the earth and we can't live without her. She can live without us, probably will live actually quite better, to be honest, like, but we'll be really sad, right? Like, our mother loves us, that's why we're here. The relationship is like, she's trying to help us and she's been pushing us. And like, when it comes to like environmental justice, like, yeah, it's, violence on the earth is violence against the people. You see violence against, missing and murdered Indigenous women, Two-Spirits, and girls, right? Like, that happens when it comes to man camps and extractive industry. But it's also like we're learning a cycle of violence, and we're learning a cycle of like a toxic relationship, right? Like, we're not living in mutuality with our mother. We're actually living instead like in this really like take relationship. And when it comes to Native folks specifically, I mean, I think that the reason that you see a lot of Indigenous women in particular leading these fights around the globe, we're 5% of the population as Native people, holding 80% of its biodiversity. We have some understandings of what it means to live in mutuality with our mother. And those are the places that have biodiversity left, right? And those are the places that mainstream society hasn't destroyed yet, but they're coming for it. And so like, we're always on this front line because like, they're coming for these pieces, right? Like, that's what's happening. And Black and brown folks and the communities that are considered sacrifice zones are the ones that are experiencing it worst of all. And we're kind of being thrust into these roles as environmental justice communities or whatever, but like, we're on the front lines of climate crisis, like, not by choice, right? It's by just simply being in the throes of colonialism and what it means to be deeply, deeply out of balance as human beings. Environmental justice is absolutely critical to our survival. We can't live without water. We just can't. I know that Native people know these things as sun dancers, as Medewans, as like lodge keepers, as all these different things. Like, we understand what it means to not have water, but it's trying to remind the rest of the world that they're in the same boat. You can only buy the bottle of water comes from somewhere, right? It comes from our mother. Yeah. Like, how we try to convince ourselves, everything comes from our mother. Everything that we're wearing, right? Every last bit of it. And the stars, because we're those people too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, having to, in biology, we call it homeostasis, a balance. And that is one thing Indigenous cultures are still in tune with, or at least try to be. And that is like one of the number one teachings that I've always been taught. What you give off comes back to you. So, and you have to take care of Unchi Maka, or Grandmother Earth, because she provides for you. We are one. So like,
also, biology majors. I was a biology major among some other ones. So
yeah, I was like, Ruth's probably in that area too.
Come on, STEM kids, it's all awesome.
Yeah, went to Indians into medicine, 7th grade through 12th grade. Actually, one of my counselors was Tokata's mom.
Yeah, I just pulled out of that. I was like, I was in India with Ruth, and her mom was our counselor. So it was my first time meeting you, Tara. So, it's time to wrap everything up. I really appreciate you ladies attending today. You are so inspiring to me and, our future generations. So keep doing what you're doing. And I definitely want to keep in touch, and definitely, and Tokata, you know, I want to see what you're going to do in life. You know, you're like, so yeah, I just, you know, just want to remind everyone, you know, our website is www.anpetuwi.com. Our general manager for Sage Development Authority is going to be on Fire Joe Fridays with Jane Fonda tomorrow and talking about fossil fuel racism. And just thank you guys all for being there. I just want to close with, you know, good thoughts, great words, amazing deeds by these beautiful women. And, you know, when we accomplish that, goodbye oppression. You know, we will keep moving forward. We will face the storm. Thank you, everyone.
Big woman. Good guys.
That's
Bye.